Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. It seems a little bit hard to believe, but Ryan Lefebvre has been part of the Kansas City sports landscape for over 2 decades now. Perhaps there's a lot of reasons for that. Perhaps one of them is the fact that he still, at almost 50 years old, is a very youthful-looking figure when he appears on television. Raised into a baseball family with a name that is obviously a little bit unique, Ryan Lefebvre has sort of lived a famous person's life for a long, long time, has traveled the world, was raised in California, decided to get away to Minnesota for college, and then, after just a few years of Major League Broadcasting, decided to make Kansas City his home. Maybe not for a long period of time, as you'll find out, but in the end, he has taken up roots here, and as I said, has been here for over 2 decades now. As we don't get to watch baseball right now, perhaps you'll enjoy listening to a lot of baseball with Ryan Lefebvre, who has a great story and tells it well, and that is why that this profile has now become a 2-part episode, and part 2 will be next Friday. Enjoy the journey of Ryan Lefebvre from California to Minnesota to Kansas City and beyond, up next on Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing. We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, you know, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is "Where Integrity Matters." Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
We're visiting with Larry Marshall, former Chiefs defensive back and punt returner and now a Chiefs ambassador. Larry is a former pro football player with the aches and pains that come with that, and moving on in age as we all are. What do the Canaway CBD products do for you?
It's been a great relief for me. Being a punt and kickoff returner, collisions were a mainstay of my career, and these Canaway products, the salve especially, has really helped me try to get through every day with the aches and pains that I've had over a career of 7+ years in the NFL.
I get similar benefits as well, particularly with my back. Certainly wasn't a football player. What's the best way for our listeners to get more information about the great products themselves?
Well, I'm so enthused about it, Dana. They just contacted me at larrymarshall.canaway.com, and I can give them all the information they need to help them get through the day as well.
Start gaining all the benefits that Larry and I do from the trusted and reliable line of Canaway products. As Larry said, visit larrymarshall.canaway.com and get information on all the great products from Canaway.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Ryan, you grew up in California. You had some detours and little journeys over to Japan to visit your dad, who you and your mom, he and your mom separated and eventually divorced early on in your life. What are your first real vivid memories at 4, 5, 6 years old, whenever you started to have them, of being in California?
Okay, I haven't thought back that far in a while. I do remember Japan. My dad my dad's last year in the major league, I believe, was 1972. I was born in 71, so I have no memory of that. And then he spent 4 years as a player, 1 year as a coach in Japan. And I do remember the last couple years making the long flight over there. He had an apartment outside of Tokyo, and there was a courtyard outside of the apartment. And I used to go play with the kids. I had a friend named Kenny, who was from Japan. He was Japanese, but his Japanese name was translated to Kenny. And I remember when I was a few years after that, his family came to the United States, and we got to go to Disneyland. And I remember some of the bigger stadiums when I was there. But what I don't remember, unfortunately, was my mom and my dad together. They separated when I was 18 months old, and when I say together, I mean, the everyday life of growing up with a mother and father at home. They divorced when I was about 5. They both remarried when I was 11, and then they went on and had kids. And so I was an only child, and I guess I'm still an only child as far as my birth parents, but I didn't have a half sibling until I was 13. And then my wife and I had 4 kids in 5 years. So
a little bit of difference.
There you go. Much different.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're a only child per se of a single mom. What was that like?
Well, it was the 1970s, and I was living in Southern California, and so I probably had more friends of divorced families than families that stayed together. It was just a time when, coming out of the 60s and that whole rebellious, wild lifestyle resulted, unfortunately, in a lot of families breaking up. So it was my mom and me, and I would go visit my dad, who lived in the Southern California area up until about 1980, 1981, when he moved to the Bay Area, when he joined the Giants. And so, as a husband and a parent now, it would sound awful for a family breaking up and an only child bouncing in between my parents, but it seemed like that's what most kids had. It did hurt, I think, Danny, being an only child. I never wanted to be an only child. I was an only child in a big extended family. So I had a lot of cousins, and we would go to my great-grandmother's house for all the big holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, and here come my cousins with all their siblings, and I really wish that I had siblings. So there were some lonely times when I was at home. My mom worked, so I'd come home from school by myself, let myself in the house and go out and play, and oftentimes I'd let myself back in the house in the early evening before she got home for dinner. So I guess it taught me to fend for myself. We moved quite a bit. I was born in Santa Monica, California, in the greater Los Angeles area, and we kind of bounced around that area from Playa del Rey to Manhattan Beach. We lived in the Valley 1 year and then moved back to Santa Monica and stayed basically on the west side of Los Angeles. And so with all that change, and I go back to being a parent now, and I'd hate to do that to my kids, but I think I learned some good survival skills, which I think helped me in my broadcasting career because I was so young when I started and I had such little experience that I think I did a pretty good job of absorbing play-by-play just by listening to other announcers and saying, okay, this is how you call this play, or this is how you, this is the rhythm of balls and strikes and outs. And I think it goes back to just moving all the time and me trying to figure out how to fit in every time we moved, and I had to be the new kid in school again. And just, I think I had a pretty strong radar of figuring out what was going on around me and how to adapt into whatever that culture was.
You mentioned that your mother would eventually remarry when you were just about to enter your teen years, I guess. And what was that like, and what was it like when she was a single person and, probably had dates and things like that? Was that odd for a young kid?
It was. It was hard. I mean, I love my dad, and I still love my dad. He was not a great father. He was just kind of a good dad. I'd go visit him and travel with him when he was in baseball, and I have great memories of hanging out with him in hotels and, at his house during a homestand and going to the ballpark early with him and going on little adventures around the stadium and shagging during batting practice and getting to be a bat boy. And but we never really had a father-son relationship like, sitting around going fishing and talking about girls and that kind of stuff. That's just not the relationship that we had. But I loved him, and I thought it was cool that he was in sports, and all my friends' dads knew who he was. So I think I resented my mom dating. I probably, like a lot of kids of divorce, you just hope that your parents are going to get back together sometime, and it never happened. And so it was rough when she was first married. My stepfather Jim and my mom and Jim live here in the Kansas City area. They've moved here, and he had no children, and so I look at it now. I'm 49 years old now. It's hard to understand when I'm a kid, but as I get older, and I'm a lot more sympathetic to the situation. And he was. I joke about this all the time. How I look at where I am now and how much older I was than my parents were then. They were in their early 30s, mid 30s, and I'm in my late 40s now. And so he was in love with my mom, and they got married. But my mom had some baggage. She had this kid who, I was a good kid, but my heart wasn't into some stepfather. My heart was into my dad. And so that was a tough adjustment period all through my teenage years, and we really didn't. And then they had a child. And then my dad got remarried, and they had 3 kids. So suddenly I'm just this remnant of a relationship that went bad. And I think I really felt that. I think I really felt like my mom and my stepdad and my dad and my stepmom were kind of moving on to their new lives. My mom and dad did not like each other. So if not for me, they would probably just moved on and never had to deal with each other again. So, I felt like the proverbial rope in a game of tug-of-war.
Right. I totally understand that. When I had my second marriage and we were discussing having kids, I'm like, I just don't, that's too complicated. First of all, I'm older. Secondly, there's no way that my children who live with their mom are not going to feel like the kids that I have now are more special than them. I don't think there's any way. So that was the way I sort of transmitted it. It is a complicated thing. It's so different. I grew up and this is not about me, but I didn't know anybody whose parents were divorced. Just shows
really
how times to change a lot in that regard. Well, obviously you're around baseball. Your dad was a Major League Baseball player and Rookie of the Year in the National League and had a 10-year professional career. When did you see that you had some aptitude for the game?
At a pretty young age, I'd say, the Santa Monica Little League had the minors and the majors, and I think the majors was like 11 and 12, and the minors were like 9, 10, and 11 or something like that. So probably when I got to the so-called majors, and I made an all-star team, and then after that we went on to Pony League, and I made an all-star team, and I was never a great player. I really wasn't good until maybe my senior year of high school, and I don't know how much I loved playing baseball. I think it goes back to being an only child. I liked being on a team, and that was kind of like having siblings, playing on a team and getting to know kids, and back then there wasn't travel team and all that, so I'd play football in the fall with the same kids I played baseball with in the spring, and so that was my family. And a lot of these kids grew up in the same neighborhood as I did in the Santa Monica area, so I think I just liked being on a team. And then in high school, my senior year, is when I really started to just figure out baseball. And I was always a good athlete. I was very good in all the sports. And but I was never great in one. And then I really started to focus on baseball my senior year. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in Los Angeles. It basically would have been like the Rockhurst of Los Angeles, and we had a powerhouse football team. We were number 1 in the nation in USA Today for about 6 or 7 weeks my senior year, and I didn't play football.
What was the name of the high school? People would probably
Loyola High School.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I didn't play my senior year of football because I was focusing on baseball, and I think I just by focusing on one sport, I really blossomed my senior year, and that's how I got the scholarship to the University of Minnesota. But and then I was a good player in college. I think I liked being a good player. I liked being an important part of the team, but I don't know how much I really just loved the game because, after 2 weeks in the minor leagues, I hung them up. I was done. My heart wasn't in it, and I knew to walk away.
I was going to get to that. I often talk to professional athletes in all sports, and quite often the sport that they are playing professionally is not the one they like the best. Mm-hmm. Was that? Did you have a favorite? Was baseball your favorite sport of the three, or just you liked being on a team? Period.
Yeah, I think I just mostly like being on a team. I mean, high school football obviously was a lot of fun, and I knew I was doing the right thing by focusing on baseball my senior year. But my gosh, I played high school football, freshman, sophomore, junior year, and here we are, number one in the nation. At least according to the USA Today poll.
Right.
I can't tell you that we were the best team in the United States, but just I think that year we started 7th, and everyone just kept losing in front of us, so we kept moving up.
Right.
But I miss being a part of that. I still will go to high school football games on Friday nights, and I hear the band playing and the kids running through the banner. I mean, I really enjoyed the rush of football. I loved beach volleyball, but I wasn't tall enough really to be a volleyball player, and my school also produced a lot of Division I volleyball players and Olympians and all that. And but yeah, I think now that I haven't really processed that before, I don't really think I missed out. When I got to college, I learned how to play hockey just because all my teammates played hockey. But nobody really cared about hockey in L.A. until Wayne Gretzky got there.
Right.
But maybe hockey would have been my best sport, Danny.
I often think now, because it just didn't resonate then, that, boy, I wish I played soccer. I think I would have been good at that. I was a good athlete, but, you always think about those things back then. When it came to time to choose college,
Mm-hmm.
what was the process like? Was Minnesota did you have differing offers? What was that whole process like for you?
Well, we'll probably get to this later in the interview, but it's very similar to why I came to Kansas City. So I get recruited heavily recruited, I should say, by 5 schools my senior year, 4 of which are on the West Coast. I really wanted to go to the University of Washington. And as fate would have it, they recruited me, and I took a visit up there. However, my dad had just been named the manager of the Mariners, and so that was
right.
part of why they were recruiting me. And I give the coach credit because he said, if you came here, this would be, great publicity for us. And even at 18, I could see through that. I think maybe you could take the angle of, well, then I'm going to take advantage of the scholarship and go to the school. If they want to take advantage of me, fine, I'll take advantage of them. But there was just something about that just didn't sit right with me. I was also recruited by Loyola Marymount University.
Mm-hmm.
My school was Loyola. There was an all-girls high school, Marymount, and then Loyola Marymount University was, the combination of the two. Pepperdine University, which was really close to home. UC Santa Barbara, which was about 2 hours from home.
Those two those two campuses are absolutely flat-ass gorgeous, by the way.
Maybe the 2 best in the country. Yeah, I mean, if you don't watch your step, you might trip and fall right into the ocean in both of those places.
Yep.
And then just really a neat story. So my dad for years used to go to this college baseball coaches clinic, and he would do this big presentation on hitting. My dad's of all the things my dad's done in baseball, he's known mostly for just being a hitting guru. And so every year, a company would hire him to do this big presentation on hitting, and you get to know all these college coaches. So I would get these letters all the time from these big programs. Hey, we're very interested in taking a look at you. And I knew what it was. It was just my dad saying, hey, would you mind sending my son a letter of encouragement? He's getting into college. So I never really took him seriously. I probably have him somewhere. But he became particularly close with John Anderson, who's the head coach at Minnesota. Still now, he's still there. And so John sent me one of those letters. I didn't pay any attention to it. I just put it in a pile with the other ones. But my senior year, Minnesota, in their spring trip, a lot of these northern schools, before the NCAA shortened the season, you could start playing in January. And so they needed a place to go. So a lot of these schools around spring break, they would just pack up and go somewhere warm and play a week's worth of games. And so my senior year, Minnesota spring trip was to Southern California, and they came out and they played UCLA, which is right down the street, USC, Cal Irvine, Pepperdine. I mean, they were there. And so the assistant coach reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to come out and watch you play. And I said, sure. So he did. He came out and he watched me play, and I guess I had a pretty good game. And he asked my coach if he could drive me home instead of me going back on the bus with my teammates. And so we drove back, going through LA traffic. We had plenty of time to talk, and him trying to sell me on the University of Minnesota. And I don't remember anything about that conversation because it probably was going in one ear and right out the other ear. He takes me home. He sits down in front of my mom, and my mom, being my mom, and she's from Wisconsin, so she has Midwest roots. She said, "Now, why would I allow my son to go to the University of Minnesota?" And Rob Fornacier, a longtime, now former assistant coach there, same thing, was talking about the merits of the University of Minnesota. And they offered me a recruiting visit. And I don't know if it's the same now or not, Danny, but back then you got 5 official recruiting visits where, they would fly you there, put you up in a hotel, wine and dine you, send you home. And so I had one left, and I thought, you know what, as a favor to my father, I'll go do this. And what had happened was that the previous winter, my dad, John Anderson, and my dad had become friends, and my dad would go to Minnesota for a few days in the winter and work with their hitters. And so they became friends, and one evening after practice, they're in the coach's room, and one of the assistant coaches says to John Anderson, "Okay, here are the recruits that we have this weekend." And my dad never went to college. He's always been fascinated by the college and recruiting and that whole experience. And so they go out to dinner that night, and my dad said, "Hey, I'm just curious, how far ahead do you have to look at recruiting, and how do you assume this kid's going to get drafted? I mean, how do you fill out your roster?" And the coach said, "Well, for instance, here's what our needs are this year." And that's when it came up. My dad said, "Well, my son is that type of a player. They were looking for a center fielder who could lead off with some speed," and that's kind of what got the ball rolling. So as a favor to my father, Minnesota watched me play a high school game, and as a favor to my father, I took a recruiting trip to Minnesota. I don't know how serious each of us really were in the beginning, but I remember flying out thinking, I'll probably never go to Minnesota ever again in my life. Why not? I'll go to a recruiting visit. I'll stay in a hotel. I'll go to a couple parties, and they'll take me to a nice restaurant, and I'll come home. And I just remember flying back from Minneapolis and just thinking to myself, well, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And I just had this feeling inside of me like, I think this is where I'm supposed to go. And it just haunted me. And I had this form that I made, and sorry, this is turning into a long story, but I had this form that I made after every visit. I had a 1, 2, and a 3, and I came up with like 10 different criteria of a college.
Right.
And I was a knucklehead 18-year-old, Danny, so it's not like I had, high aspirations or anything, but I was mature enough to come up with this form chart, and if it was great, I'd give it a 3. If it was okay, I'd give it a 2, and if I didn't like it, it was a 1. And in the end, Minnesota by far had the highest score, so I just kind of trusted my gut, and that's how it all happened.
You were, you've downplayed your ability, but you were quite a good college player. You were player of the year for your team a couple times, and 3 times All Big Ten. You played some games in the Metrodome, is that correct? Or?
Yeah. My first 2 years, we played a tournament in the Metrodome, and that was it. And we had a lot of really good schools that came in. Stanford and Wichita State and Miami, schools like that would come and play in our tournament. And then by my junior year, my coach figured out, why are we going out to Florida and California and getting our brains beaten in for a week? Why don't we have teams come here and play in the Metrodome? And until it was torn down, we had still do have a beautiful stadium on campus, but in the cold months, we really took advantage of the Metrodome.
What was Big Ten baseball like? I mean, it must have been cold. I mean, if you didn't get a cold game, it must have been a real, mint of a day.
It was. I'll never forget. We went to Iowa to play a midweek doubleheader, and we got to the stadium, and they were chipping ice off the tarp so that they could roll the tarp up. And I remember thinking, there's no way we can play in this, right? And my teammates were cold, but I remember thinking nobody's really complaining. And it was low 40s and windy in Iowa City. I mean, it was brutal. And we played a doubleheader. And I remember standing out in center field thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? It's a tough conference for baseball. It really is. I mean, you really only have about 2 or 3 weeks at the very end of the season when you have decent weather, and maybe you'll have 2 or 3, what you'd call great baseball days, and then the season's over. So we played mostly in the cold, and it was hard. I mean, I don't. Baseball's not a cold weather sport, but I figured out a way to get through it somehow. But I spent many more games uncomfortable on the field than I was comfortable on the field.
What was life like at the University of Minnesota away from baseball?
It was the first time that I really felt like I was making it through life on my own credentials. I think in Los Angeles with my dad being an LA native and a former Dodger, and by the time I was in high school, he was a major league coach again. He was a hitting coach and third base coach for the Bash Brothers A's teams, that went to the World Series in '88, lost to the Dodgers in LA, and then from there became manager of the Mariners, and in '89, he was Ken Griffey Jr.'s first manager, Omar Vizquel's first manager, and so he became a pretty high-profile person. And so I think I was not only living in his shadow, but I was living in the shadow of just a Lefebvre name. My grandfather was a legendary high school baseball coach in Southern California. He had 3 boys. They were all switch hitters. They all played professional baseball. My dad was the only one who made it to the major leagues, and so I think it was just expected of me to play baseball. It's a unique name, it's not like
right.
Smith or Johnson. I mean, it's when you hear Lefebvre, you
figure that you figure he's your dad
right away. You related to Jim Lefebvre? That's the first thing that people would say. So, and it's not like that changed a whole lot in Minnesota, but I wasn't in California anymore, and it was like, I made this decision on my own. I earned the scholarship on my own, and I still had a long way to go as far as maturity. But, it kind of set the stage for where I am right now to just get out of Southern California. I have a lot of high school friends. God bless them. They're happy, I'm sure. But, they just never really left L.A., and I got out of L.A. And I think, as you asked me why Minnesota, I think another reason I didn't mention is because I had some high school friends that were older. And they just, when they would come home for Thanksgiving and Christmas in the summer, I just noticed a difference between the kids that stuck around and went to USC and UCLA and then the kids that went to like Boston College or wherever. The kids that went away were just more interesting to be around. And so
right.
It's a big school, and I loved it. I really thought I'd never leave Minnesota. And it was my thing. I did all of that, I felt like, on my own.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Vision's goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300. My friends at Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture are among the most accomplished and trusted clinics in the nation. Only one clinic has been rated in the top 5 in all 3 categories of chiropractic care, acupuncture, and rehabilitation, and that clinic is ASFCA. They have locations in Olathe, Overland Park, Prairie Village, Belton, and Lee Summit. Doctors Brad and Christina Woodle and their accomplished team of doctors and therapists will treat you like family, for the simplest of injuries to the most complicated conditions to avoid surgery. Whether you are seeking treatment for an injury or just looking to stay healthy and fit, this is the place for you. And it's been the place for me for almost 2 years now. I've been a strenuous daily exerciser for years, and as time goes on, that takes its toll. But regular appointments at Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture have helped keep me ticking on, and even as the years pile up, their regular care has allowed me to keep to my regimen and feel great. If you want to feel the same, give them a call or visit them at asfca.com/Danny. They accept all insurances and are open Monday through Saturday, and make sure to mention that Danny Clinkscale recommended Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture. Are you thinking of starting a new business? Does your current business feel stuck? Or are you just trying to grow what you already have? Running a business is a lot of work, and it takes the right team to make it all happen. If you're looking to grow your business, call my friends Ben and Greg over at Fuego Consulting. They put together a company that can help you reach your business goals. Whether you're looking to get online, build a social media strategy, or rebrand your business, they can help. Call Fuego at 816-663-9695 or visit them online at fuegoconsulting.com. Fuego Consulting. Let's grow your business together.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Llewellyn from 23rd Street Brewery, wishing you well while you stay safe during this time of uncertainty. Due to the recent news, you won't be able to get the same in-restaurant experience at the 23rd Street Brewery that you've come to expect over the past 16 years. But you can get the same delicious items prepared with the highest level of staff cleanliness available for carryout and delivery through our partners Eat Street. You can also still enjoy our craft beers and crowlers for to-go service. So remember, stay safe, and together we will all get through this time of uncertainty.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Our guest is Ryan Lefebvre. His story is fascinating. It has many more twists and turns to come. And you finished college. You've mentioned all along that you liked being part of a team, but you didn't love baseball. So it was time to, you played professionally. You played through your senior year in college,
yes.
Correct?
Yep,
right?
I did.
So you wouldn't have had like giant bargaining chips when it came for time for a professional. How did the transition to what would be a very short professional career come about?
Well, two things happened in particular. First of all, I went to 2 summers I played in the Cape Cod College League, which very, very prestigious. You're familiar with that neck of the woods, obviously. And first year I really struggled, with the wooden bat and just playing with that caliber of players. I mean, I don't know if it is now what it was then, but I mean, it was like...
It was thing, yeah.
It was really good. And to be invited, you didn't really have a choice. I mean, if you're invited, you just went. And I remember that first year, now I'm on a team with a bunch of guys that I don't really know. The teams that I played for in the Cape were mostly Big Ten players and Midwest players, so I knew some of them because I played against them. And some of them become friends, but it just wasn't the same. And I just remember thinking, because everyone knew what was at stake. You're playing in the Cape Cod League. There were scouts everywhere every night, and guys, I remember thinking, they care about this way more than I do. So that was eye-opening to me. I went back the next summer and played really well, made the All-Star team. I also had my first internship at a radio station, WCIB radio station on the Cape, and I loved it.
What town was that?
What's that?
What town was that?
In Falmouth.
Okay, there you go.
In Falmouth. It's right in between Falmouth and Hyannis.
Okay.
And I remember I had way more fun at the internship than I did playing, even though I was playing really well. So that was number one, just realizing that I didn't know if I cared enough about the game when you took the friends and the teammates away. And then, even though there were teams on the West Coast that recruited me, and when I say recruited me, I say that loosely. I wasn't like it's not like those West Coast teams were banging down the door to get me to go there. I mean, they were interested in me. But I think I played with a chip on my shoulder that helped me in college, that that USC and UCLA weren't really that interested in me. And when we played UCLA one year in that tournament at the Metrodome I talked about, I mean, I wanted to beat them so bad. My sophomore year, we played in the NCAA tournament, and it was at USC. And I mean, I was all tournament. I mean, I went off on that. And that never got to play USC, as it turned out. But I think there was a part of me that just wanted to prove that the Southern California coaches made a mistake. Even though I was happy in Minnesota, I still felt slighted. And then my senior year, my college career ended in the NCAA tournament at ASU, and we were playing Pepperdine. Pepperdine was the opening round game. They had won the national championship the year before. Their coach was Andy Lopez, who had a legendary career at Arizona, Long Beach State, and Pepperdine. And he was at Loyola Marymount when I was in high school, and so he was one of the guys that, as I say, loosely recruited me. So after the first round, we play Pepperdine, and Pepperdine beats us, and we're going through the line. You know, you clap at him, slap at hands to everybody, good game, good game, good game, good game. And we get to the end of the line, and there's Andy Lopez, and Andy said, "Hey, Ryan, can I talk to you for a minute?" And so he and I walked, we kind of went off to the side, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he goes, "Ryan, I just want to tell you that I am so happy for you. You had a great college career, and I just want to congratulate you, and I just want you to know," and he just looked in my eyes. He goes, "I want you to know a lot of us coaches in Southern California missed out on you. A lot of us would love to have had you play for us for 4 years, and I just want to congratulate you on a great career." And I've never seen Andy Lopez since then, but he effectively ended his football career with that conversation because, like, the fire was gone, the chip was gone. I felt like, you know, I broke a lot of records at Minnesota, and you know, we won a Big Ten championship, and I got to go to the NCAA tournament 3 times, and I was getting interested in other things, but that conversation, I think I needed to hear that, and so I got drafted in the 27th round by the Cleveland Indians that year, and after about 2 weeks, Danny, I just didn't. I knew enough. I mean, here's my one compliment to myself. I was a really good college player. I was not a great professional prospect. So even though, you know, 27th round guys do make it to the major leagues, I knew enough about the game and the industry and the road ahead that just I didn't care enough to grind through all of that. So after 2 weeks, I quit. Mark Shapiro, who's now
by the way, I just will interrupt here. You played for Watertown in the New York Penn League in 1993.
1993.
I was the voice of the Utica Blue Sox in 1993. I could have called one of your games because we did play the Watertown Pirates. I don't know if my favorite Watertown Pirates story is that I actually broadcast games where Tim Wakefield played first base badly. And eventually
before he became a knuckleballer. That's right. He was an infield. He was a first baseman, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know whether I called one of your games, but it is possible in the 2 weeks you stayed there, in the 6 games you played for the Watertown Pirates. But go on to the Mark Shapiro.
Well, he was the farm director of the Indians at that time, and he went on to be a very successful GM with the Indians, and now he's the president of the Blue Jays. But he called me, and he tried to convince me to stay. And the reason was not because I was a big prospect, but in the lower minor leagues, the baseball's really not that good, and they needed players like me who knew how to bunt and knew how to hit the cutoff man. And there's just a lot of raw players there who really didn't have a feel for the game. And so you get guys who come from Division I programs; they know how to play the game. You need guys like that on the roster. And we talked on the phone for an hour, and I just told him I was done. And my funny ending to that story was, I know we'll get into my broadcasting career, but a couple years later, I run into John Hart, who was the GM of the Indians at that time, and the Indians were a powerhouse. Mm-hmm. And it was my first year with the Twins in '95, and I saw John Hart, and I went up and I introduced myself to him, and he goes, "Oh, Ryan," because I had spoken to him briefly too. He also got on the phone and tried to convince me to stay, and he says, "Oh, good for you. What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm on, broadcasting for the Twins." And he says, "Oh man, well, good for you." He goes, "Well, I wish you the best, but I sure wish you were in our outfield." And I remember thinking, you've got Manny Ramirez, Kenny Lofton, and Albert Bell. What in the world would I be doing in your outfield?
I call bullshit.
That's right.
Well, certainly, because you're talking about the timeline here. It was an incredible fast track for you. How within 2 years of you quitting baseball were you calling Major League Baseball games?
Yeah, I dove into it, and I just absolutely immersed myself. And I was fortunate in that I was, University of Minnesota is in Minneapolis, so I was in a major media market, and my coach helped me in that every time somebody from a radio station or a television station or even writers from the newspaper would come out and cover us, John Anderson would always introduce me to them and say, Ryan wants to get into broadcasting. So I had met a lot of people. I had quite a few internships, so I had networked myself really well. And so I interned at an all-sports radio station, KFAN, which is huge now in Minneapolis. It was just beginning back then. I interned at Midwest Sports Channel, which is now Fox Sports North, WCCO TV. There were 2 on-campus radio stations at the University of Minnesota when I was there, so I had a lot of experience. At that time, I quit in 1993. That was also the first year of the St. Paul Saints and the whole beginning of the independent baseball phenomenon.
Right.
So I was the color commentator for the St. Paul Saints after I returned that summer. And the next year, there was a team called the Minneapolis Loons in '94, and I did play-by-play for them. So I was well-connected. I was working hard, but truth be told, it was really just being in the right place at the right time. What helped me more than anything was when Fox started to get involved with sports. And I tell the story when I go to colleges and speak to college students, and I say, all of your lives, all you know is Fox football and Fox baseball. But when you and I were kids, Danny, Fox wasn't a player at all. I mean, they were a fringe network at best. And in 1992, they kind of just stunned the sports world when they got the rights to the NFL. And back then, the rights would shift amongst ABC, NBC, and CBS, and when one network would get the rights from another, they would just hire those announcers. So you had these network announcers that would just go from network to network to network, and they were all 50s, 60s, maybe even in their 70s. Here comes Fox, and everyone's going, what's this all about? And then they hire all these young guys, Joe Buck, Tom Brenneman. The next year, they get the rights to baseball. Joe Buck, Tom Brenneman, Josh Lewin, Chip Carey. They just kept hiring these young announcers, and it had a trickle-down effect from the network level down to the regional networks. And I was fortunate in that gentleman by the name of Tim Scanlon, who is the executive producer of Midwest Sports Channel. They had the rights to the Twins in the University of Minnesota. And he said, you know what, maybe we should have a young guy on our broadcast team. And I had been doing some stuff for them already. First I was an intern, then I was doing some play-by-play for them on some small events. And at the time, imagine, if you're a Royals fan, imagine me doing the pregame show on TV and then calling the game. And that's what Dick Bramer was doing for the Minnesota Twins. He was doing what Joel Goldberg does for us now on Fox Sports Kansas City and then calling the game. So they had been looking for someone to take that load off of his shoulders.
Right.
And so that's how I got my break in 1995. I'd worked hard, I had networked well, and I was in the right place at the right time when the industry was going young. And I mean, had this happened 5 years before or 5 years later, you and I are probably not talking.
Well, you had a good time, a good span of years for the Twins. It's your home. You thought you'd never leave. You said earlier you would get to the story of you moving to Kansas City, but you're only there for basically 4 years. And why the decision to move to Kansas City when you really had found this new home that you really appreciated so much?
Yeah, and I was doing like 90 to 100 games a year. The main radio voice of the Twins, the late Herb Carneal, was only doing home games. So I was doing road games on radio, and then I was filling in for the TV guys at home. And so I was doing 90 to 100 games. And I mean, I was clearly going to be the next guy when somebody, retired. And I was doing University of Minnesota football on TV in the fall. I was part of the hockey broadcast team in the winter. I mean, I had it made. I mean, I had a great career in a very short period of time. On radio, my contract was up after my first 4 years. I did television, and then 3 of those 4 years I did radio and television. Right. So after my third year of radio, my contract was up, and so I knew they weren't paying me what a major league announcer should be paid, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to talk to them and I'm going to ask them for a raise. And I talked to 10 different announcers that summer from other teams, and I said, I'm not going to tell you what I'm making, and I don't necessarily want you to tell me what you're making, but if you were my agent and you're representing me, what is the minimum that you think I should be making per game? And 9 out of the 10 guys gave me the exact same figure. So I went into WCCO radio. Here's my big meeting, and I'm going to ask for this, which I look back on it now, it wasn't as big a raise as I thought. But for me, I'm 27 years old. I thought I was asking for a mountain of money. And I went in there, and I thought I made a good presentation, and they basically just turned me down. And said, well, we still have to pay Herb, even though he doesn't do the road games. It's not like we only pay him half, and the team's not doing well, and the ratings, and blah blah blah. And I was really disappointed. And I remember the program director at WCCO at the time made some reference as to, for someone your age. And I was offended by that, because I thought, I've been doing major league games for you for 3 years. Why does my age have anything to do with it?
Exactly.
And so I remember thinking, I left that, and I was sad, I was angry, I was disappointed. But I remember thinking, do they just see me as some kid, or maybe they don't really see me as maybe I'm just just because I'm doing games on TV, they may as well use me on radio. Maybe they don't see me as a legitimate announcer. Well, I'll take you back a month before that. Fred White had been let go by the Royals, and I had an agent at the time, and she called me and said, would you be interested in the Royals job? And I said, absolutely not. I am not going to be the clown that goes into Kansas City after Fred White, because I was already having my own issues doing road games for Herb Carneal. Herb Carneal had been doing the Twins games for 35 years. They didn't necessarily want to listen to me, and now I'm going to go to a place where I have no ties whatsoever and follow a legend. And I thought, I have no interest whatsoever. Well, then I had the meeting with WCCO, and Danny, as God is my witness, I go back to my apartment that night, hanging my head, feeling defeated, and my lights blinking on my answering machine, back when we had answering machines. And it was a call from the Royals radio network asking me if I would be interested in their radio job. Now, they had no idea that I wasn't interested, because my agent never pursued it, because I told her I wasn't interested. And Sue Rayson, you remember Sue Rayson? Sure. Who was worked for Entercom and the Royals as part of the Royals radio network, asked me if I'd call her, and I did. And she asked if I could fly to Kansas City and interview for the job, and for nothing more than leverage in Minneapolis. I thought, sure. So I go back to that story about me going to the University of Minnesota on a recruiting visit. My heart wasn't in it, but I thought, you know what, maybe I can get some leverage by interviewing. And so I called a buddy of mine at the Star Tribune, Minneapolis Star Tribune. He's still there, Jim Suhan, and I told him. And I remember getting on an airplane, Northwest Airlines, back when there was Northwest Airlines, and they flew me in first class. It's a 1-hour flight. You really can't take advantage of first class in 1 hour. But and I sat in my seat, Danny, and I opened up the Star Tribune, and on the inside of page 1, the headline said, Lefebvre to interview with Royals today. And I thought, yes, I'm going to come back from this interview, and they're going to be waiting for me at the airport with a huge raise, and don't leave. It was all playing out exactly the way I wanted it to. But just like my trip to Minneapolis, the visit that I had in Kansas City did not go the way I expected it to. They treated me great. They showed me around town. I had lunch at the stadium, and I'd been to the stadium before, traveling with the Twins. And I had that same feeling, I could stay here where it's nice and comfortable, or I could take on this challenge and grow and maybe just go back to Minnesota sometime. It wouldn't hurt to come to Kansas City for 2 or 3 years. I'm single. Why not? So those two stories are very similar in that, what do they say? You want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And I was loosely interested in the University of Minnesota. I was loosely interested in Kansas City, but on both of those flights back home, I was haunted with the same feelings of, I think this is where I'm supposed to be. And that's how it all happened. And so I eventually accepted the job. It was December 23rd of 1998. I was visiting my grandparents in Wisconsin. I officially accepted the job. Don Fortune that night had me on his radio show, and And I hung up the phone. I thought, well, I guess I'm doing this. And so I told my grandparents, come on, let's go out for dinner. And in little Rochester, Wisconsin, we went to a place called the Coral Reef. And when we walked inside, the special that night was the Kansas City Strip. And I thought that maybe that was a sign that I made the right decision.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.